Imagine this. You wake in the pale blue light before dawn, a silence so complete it almost hums in your ears. The clock ticks. The coffee machine groans to life. You scroll through your phone without knowing why. Somewhere between the warm sip and the cold stare into nothing, it hits you. There's no urgent reason to be awake today. Oh, you have things to do. You have emails, you have bills, you have deadlines. But none of them have weight. None of them seem to pulse with the fierce necessity that makes life feel alive. You could accomplish all of them, check every box, play the game perfectly, and still go to bed with the same gnawing question pressing into your skull. What is all of this for? This is not a crisis of having too little. It's a crisis of having everything and feeling nothing. In the modern world, we've tamed so much of the chaos our ancestors feared. Hunger, disease, war, though never completely. Yet it seems the more we control the outside world, the more unruly the inside world becomes. We've replaced survival with comfort, but in doing so, we've left ourselves unarmed before the oldest of all predators, meaninglessness. It doesn't kill you outright, it's more patient than that. It lets you live long enough to become bored of your own life. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But what happens when the why dissolves? When the scaffolding of purpose, religion, tradition, destiny collapses under the weight of modern doubt? You're left suspended in an open sky without a rope, without a net. It's not that you don't know what to do tomorrow. It's that you don't know why tomorrow matters. This is the paradox. We are more free than any generation before us, yet we are shackled by an invisible emptiness. You can choose your career, your partner, your beliefs, even your gender and your country of residence. But the moment you step into the boundless field of options, you realize freedom without direction is a form of drowning. Choice, without a unifying purpose, becomes a labyrinth. Every road looks equally meaningless. And here's where it gets darker. Many don't notice this slow erosion. They mask it with noise, streaming shows, scrolling endlessly, shopping for things they don't need. It's not that these activities are inherently evil, it's that they're anesthetics. And the anesthesia wears off. The show ends, the package arrives, the phone battery dies, and then, there you are, sitting with the unanswered question you've been avoiding. What is the point? But maybe you've tried to answer it. Maybe you've read the self-help books that tell you to find your passion or set goals or visualize your ideal future. And maybe that worked for a while, until it didn't. Because here's the secret no book cover tells you. The search for meaning is not about stacking up pleasures or achievements until they form a tower high enough to reach the sky. It's about confronting the uncomfortable possibility that meaning is not something you find at all. Nietzsche knew this long before the quarter-life crisis had a name. He looked into the same abyss we face now and saw that the danger wasn't just despair, it was the temptation to numb ourselves into passivity. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he warned of the last man, a creature who has no great passion or suffering, who avoids risk, who values comfort above all else, and who calls this dull safety happiness. The last man blinks and says, "We have invented happiness." But Nietzsche saw it for what it was, the slow death of the soul. If that sounds extreme, ask yourself, when was the last time you felt something so intensely, whether joy, grief, awe, that it split you open and rearranged you inside? When was the last time you chased something so fiercely it made you forget to check your phone? If you can't remember, you're not alone. Our culture teaches us to seek balance, but balance too often becomes sedation. So here you are, a being capable of wonder, fear, creation, destruction. And yet most days, you operate like a well-fed ghost. You move, you consume, you exist. But do you live? The real question is not what's the meaning of life? Too abstract, too grand to touch. The real question is this: what would it take for you to burn again? What vision, what struggle, what act of creation could make the days feel too short instead of too long? And what would you sacrifice to have that? Because if Nietzsche was right, meaning is not a gift given to you. It's a conquest. And conquest is never safe. But here's the riddle, the tension we can't yet resolve. To reclaim meaning, you must face the very forces that make life seem meaningless. You must confront the hollow center without flinching. You must, in Nietzsche's words, have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star. and that means walking straight into the storm that everyone else is trying to avoid. We'll go there next. But first, you must understand why this storm exists at all, and why it is the defining crisis of our age. That is where our journey turns next. The storm begins in places most people never think to look, in the slow, almost imperceptible erosion of the very foundations on which human beings once built their sense of meaning. For most of history, you inherited your why without ever asking for it. Your role, your beliefs, your moral compass, even your sense of what counted as a good life were handed to you by tradition, religion, family, and culture. These were not suggestions. They were the unquestioned architecture of existence. A medieval farmer did not wake up wondering if farming was really his passion. A monk in the 12th century didn't agonize over whether his vow of poverty aligned with his personal brand. These structures, rigid and sometimes oppressive, provided a framework that, for better or worse, made the question of meaning largely invisible. Nietzsche called this the metaphysical comfort of earlier ages, the sense that life was woven into a divine or cosmic order. But modernity dismantled that scaffolding. The Enlightenment questioned the authority of the Church. The scientific revolution revealed a universe indifferent to human concerns, and industrial capitalism tore people away from the land and the rhythms of communal life. By the time Nietzsche was writing in the late 19th century, God, as a cultural source of ultimate meaning, was already on life support. His infamous declaration, "God is dead and we have killed him," was not a celebration of atheism. It was a diagnosis of a civilizational collapse in the meaning structure of the West. Without the anchor of a shared, unquestioned purpose, modern man was adrift in an open sea of possibilities with no compass, no North Star. And here is where psychology deepens the wound. Carl Jung observed that when the old religious and mythic frameworks disintegrate, the human psyche doesn't become free and clear. It becomes vulnerable to being seized by unconscious forces. The great religious symbols, the archetypes, the mythic dramas, they don't vanish just because we stop believing in them. They retreat into the unconscious, where they distort themselves into new, often destructive forms. What once lived in sacred temples now seeps out through political fanaticism, consumer obsession, and the desperate search for belonging in ideologies or lifestyles that promise identity without demanding inner transformation. Arthur Schopenhauer had already warned that life without a unifying purpose becomes a restless pendulum between pain and boredom. Pain when we strive for something we lack, boredom when we achieve it and find it empty. In a world where the why is gone, this pendulum swings faster because there is nothing to hold it still. Modern consumer culture offers temporary escapes, experiences, products, distractions that promise to fill the void but ultimately only deepen it. And on the deepest level, the human brain itself is not designed for sustained purposelessness. Neuroscience tells us that our reward circuits evolved to respond to challenges tied to survival, finding food, securing shelter, gaining social standing in a tribe. When life's challenges become abstract and optional, the machinery misfires. We can trick it for a while, gamifying work, chasing dopamine hits from social media, but the underlying restlessness remains because the stakes aren't real. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps, understood this with brutal clarity. Life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by lack of meaning and purpose. Frankl argued that meaning is not a luxury, it is a necessity as basic to the human spirit as oxygen is to the body. And yet, our culture treats it as an optional hobby, something you figure out in your spare time if you're inclined. This hidden problem is compounded by what Jean-Paul Sartre called the condemnation to be free. Once the old orders collapse, you are no longer told who you are. You must decide. And this decision is terrifying. Total freedom means total responsibility for the shape of your life, and most people are not taught how to bear that weight. It's far easier to slip into what Sartre called bad faith, pretending you have no choice, living out roles you didn't consciously choose, convincing yourself you're trapped when, in truth, you're simply avoiding the risk of choosing. But here's the final twist. We live in an age where society encourages this avoidance. The cultural machine thrives on keeping you comfortable enough not to rebel, distracted enough not to question, and afraid enough not to step off the treadmill. You are told you can be anything, but subtly trained to want only what can be bought. You are told to be yourself, but sold prepackaged identities in the form of brands, aesthetics, and curated lifestyles. The more you participate, the more the machine hums along, and the less you notice that you have become the very figure Nietzsche warned about, the last man, whose horizon of life is no longer the conquest of great struggles, but the avoidance of discomfort. This is why the problem is so hidden. It doesn't feel like a crisis. It feels like a quiet, tolerable dissatisfaction. And yet, this low-level hum of existential emptiness shapes your choices, your moods, your relationships. It makes you less alive without making you dramatically unhappy, because dramatic unhappiness might actually provoke change. The hidden problem is not that life has no meaning, but that we've become skilled at living without noticing its absence. And the danger is that in numbing yourself to that absence, you also numb yourself to the heights of joy, beauty, and passion that are only possible when you risk confronting it directly. Nietzsche saw this not as a flaw in human nature, but as a transitional sickness of our time, a symptom of moving from an age of inherited meaning to one where meaning must be created. But creation requires chaos, courage, and the willingness to step outside the comfortable shadows into the blinding uncertainty of the sun. Most will not do this, and yet those who do may discover something extraordinary. But before we talk about the rebellion, you must see how this hidden emptiness doesn't just live in your own mind. It weaves itself into the very fabric of the world around you, shaping a civilization that sleepwalks while believing it is awake. That is where we turn next. You might think the absence of a unifying why is just a private matter, a quiet burden you carry alone. But step back and you'll see that the void inside individuals eventually bleeds outward, saturating the world they build together. Meaninglessness is not static, it metastasizes. It reshapes culture, politics, relationships, even the way we experience time. At first it appears harmless. Life still goes on, people still work, still laugh, still fall in love. But beneath the surface, the compass needle spins without settling, and entire societies begin to drift. Without a collective vision of what is worth striving for, people default to chasing what is most visible and immediately rewarding. This is how consumerism becomes not just an economic system, but a moral one. The question, is this good, is replaced by, is this desirable, and does this make me happy right now? Success becomes a matter of accumulating tokens, money, followers, possessions, while the deeper question of whether those tokens build toward anything worth living for is left unanswered. It's not that people consciously choose this shallowness, it's that the deeper choice requires confronting the discomfort of not knowing, and so the surface-level rewards feel safer. Over time, the consequences become architectural. Cities are designed for efficiency and profit, not beauty or human connection. Public spaces shrink, replaced by commercial zones. Workplaces become optimized for output, not meaning. Education trains students to compete for jobs, not to cultivate wisdom. The void seeps into the very structures that shape us, so that even if you want to live differently, the system around you subtly pushes you back toward the same cycles of distraction and consumption. Psychologically, the absence of meaning warps our relationship to time. Without a sense of purpose that stretches beyond the immediate, the present moment becomes either an escape or an enemy. People live for the weekend, for the next vacation, for the end of the workday. Always somewhere else, never fully here. The future becomes a place you project fantasies into, but rarely a reality you consciously shape. And when the present fails to live up to those fantasies, the gap between expectation and reality breeds chronic dissatisfaction. On a neurological level, this restlessness is amplified by the digital environment we've built. Our devices drip-feed us novelty, keeping the brain's reward system constantly stimulated, but in shallow bursts. It's like snacking all day on empty calories. You're full, but malnourished. The capacity for sustained attention, for deep engagement with a single task or question, atrophies. And without that capacity, the pursuit of deep meaning becomes nearly impossible, because meaning emerges from immersion, not from skimming the surface of life. Socially, the consequences are just as corrosive. When people lack a shared sense of purpose, they grasp at whatever identities are offered to them. political tribes, lifestyle brands, online communities. There's nothing inherently wrong with belonging to a group, but when the group's primary function is to fill a personal void, it becomes fragile and reactive. People cling to these identities not out of genuine conviction, but out of fear that without them, they are nothing. This is why our public discourse is so brittle, why disagreement feels like an existential threat, why people fight over symbols with the ferocity once reserved for survival itself. On a deeper existential level, meaninglessness erodes resilience. If you see no larger arc to your life, suffering becomes intolerable. Nietzsche warned of this when he said, "If we have our own why of life, we shall get along with almost any how. Man does not strive for pleasure, only the Englishman does." His jab at utilitarianism carried a truth. Pleasure is too fragile to be the foundation of a life, because pain will always come. Without a unifying purpose, pain has no place to go. It's just raw, meaningless suffering. But the most dangerous consequence of all is how invisible this trap becomes over time. We mistake busyness for purpose, comfort for happiness, and stability for life. We forget that every culture in history has had its own myths, rituals, and heroic ideals, not because they were nice traditions, but because they served as scaffolding for human vitality. We tear down the old scaffolding without building new forms of meaning robust enough to replace it. The result is a culture that feels more like a holding pattern than a journey. And when a whole civilization loses its why, history shows us what happens next. The vacuum is filled by anything capable of offering direction, even if it is destructive. Ideologies, cults, authoritarian movements, they all thrive in the soil of meaninglessness. People would rather belong to something dangerous than to nothing at all. The human spirit cannot bear prolonged purposelessness. It will accept false meaning if true meaning is absent. And this is where the stakes become clear. The question of meaning is not a luxury for philosophers to debate in quiet rooms. It is a matter of survival for both individuals and civilizations. We live in an age where it is entirely possible to go from birth to death without ever consciously confronting the question of what you are living for. The machine can keep you entertained, distracted, and fed until you're gone. But if you sense that something essential is missing, if you feel the faint pulse of a deeper hunger, then you are already standing at a fork in the road. You can return to sleep, or you can face the discomfort of the question head on. This is where Nietzsche would tell you that the absence of meaning is not just a problem, it's an opportunity. Because once the inherited why has crumbled, you are free, for the first time in human history, to build your own. But building requires destruction. Creation requires risk, and stepping off the safe path means you will never be the same again. Which brings us to the rebellion, the moment you decide that the comfort of the last man is too small for you, and that you would rather burn in the sun than live in the shadows. That's where we turn next. Breaking free from the gravitational pull of meaninglessness is not a polite, orderly process. It is an act of rebellion, a refusal to live by the small terms the world quietly offers you. And rebellion, as Nietzsche understood it, begins not with shouting in the streets, but with an inner decision so fierce it rearranges the architecture of your life. Imagine standing at the edge of a great plain where all the safe, familiar paths stretch out behind you, but before you lies only unmarked wilderness. Most people glance into that wilderness and step back, telling themselves there's nothing there worth finding. But you know the truth. Every real transformation lies in that unknown. Nietzsche's cure for the meaningless life is not to find some ready-made philosophy to slot yourself into. It is to become the kind of person who can create meaning as an artist creates a masterpiece. This is why he speaks of the Übermensch, not as a biological superhuman, but as a symbolic figure who transcends the inherited values of the past and forges new ones. This is not about arrogance or domination. It is about courage. The courage to question every belief you inherited, every story you've been told about what a good life should be, and to test those stories against your own experience. To do this, you must first stop seeking permission. The world is full of gatekeepers, institutions, traditions, even well-meaning friends and family, who will tell you that meaning comes from fitting into the right mold. But molds are for objects, not for living beings. To break free, you must be willing to disappoint people who want you to live according to their script. This is the first rebellion, the rebellion against borrowed lives. Once you've made that break, the work becomes harder because you can't simply reject the old without building the new. Nietzsche's concept of life-affirmation is key here. The rebellion is not about tearing everything down in bitterness. It is about saying yes to life in its entirety, including its pain, its chaos, its unpredictability. He gives us the thought experiment of the eternal recurrence. Imagine that every moment of your life, every joy and every humiliation would repeat infinitely, exactly as it has been. Would you curse this fate, or would you embrace it so fully that you would cry, yes, once more? To live as if you could affirm your life eternally is to squeeze the deepest possible meaning from it, here and now, without waiting for cosmic guarantees. Practically, this means reorienting your life around creation, not consumption. In a culture that conditions you to measure worth by what you own or how much you can accumulate, turning instead toward what you can build, art, relationships, ideas, acts of courage, becomes a revolutionary act. This is why Nietzsche loved the metaphor of the artist, the one who shapes chaos into form. You are the sculptor, and your life is the clay. No one else can make this shape for you. But creation also requires struggle, and here is where most turn back. We have been trained to think of struggle as something to be minimized, as a problem to be fixed. Nietzsche turns this upside down. The struggle is not the obstacle to meaning, it is the source of it. One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star, he wrote. The chaos is your raw material. To rebel is to stop wishing it away and start shaping it. And yes, this means suffering will be part of the path. But there is a difference between the suffering of stagnation and the suffering of growth. The first drains you, the second strengthens you. To break free, you must learn to tell the difference. You must also understand that the rebellion is not a one-time event. It is a way of living. Every day, you will face the temptation to return to comfort, to be the last man blinking in complacent satisfaction. And every day you must refuse. This refusal is not fueled by anger but by a vision of a life so vivid and self-created that you would not trade it for anything, a life you could affirm even in eternal recurrence. Think of the historical examples. Artists who created entire worlds from their imagination, scientists who defied consensus to uncover new truths, individuals who walked away from wealth or power because they refused to be owned by it. These are not superheroes. They are people who decided the safe script was too small for them. They lived dangerously in Nietzsche's sense, not recklessly, but with the full awareness that the greatest risk is to never risk at all. And here is the paradox of the rebellion. The more you commit to creating your own meaning, the more connected you become to life itself. By taking responsibility for your existence, you stop floating like a passive passenger and start steering, even through storms. The wilderness before you becomes less a threat and more a field of possibility. You begin to see that the void you feared was not empty after all. It was the blank canvas waiting for your first stroke of paint. This is how you break free, not by finding a pre-written answer, but by becoming the kind of person who can live without one, who can shape the raw clay of existence into something so personal, so alive, that it could only have been made by you. And once you understand that, the final and most powerful realization becomes clear, the one that transforms the rebellion from an act into a way of being. That is the truth we will face next. Here it is, the truth that Nietzsche hints at again and again, sometimes in aphorisms, sometimes in parables, but always with the force of someone trying to shake a sleeping world awake. The final realization is that life's meaning is not something hidden out there, waiting for you to uncover it like a buried treasure. It is not in a book, not in a guru's teachings, not in the stars. It is not even in Nietzsche's own philosophy. The most powerful truth is that meaning exists only when you create it, and that creation is inseparable from the act of living itself. You are not here to receive the universe's plan. You are here to write your own. This is why Nietzsche's cure for the meaningless life is so demanding, because it removes every crutch. There will be no final authority to bless your choices, no cosmic guarantee that you are on the right path. You are the authority. And with that realization comes both terrifying freedom and unparalleled power. It is terrifying because the safety net of certainty is gone. There's no one to blame when things go wrong, no one to congratulate when you succeed but yourself. And it is powerful because now, for the first time, you are free to shape your existence without waiting for permission from God, society, or fate. The ultimate truth is this: meaning is not found, it is made, and its making is an ongoing act, not a final product. The moment you stop creating it, it evaporates. This is why Nietzsche speaks of life as a work of art. A great painting is never the result of a single, perfect brushstroke. It is the accumulation of countless strokes, adjustments, bold risks, and moments of stepping back to see the whole. Your life is the same. The mistake is thinking you can arrive at a meaning once and for all, like a solved puzzle. No, meaning is not a puzzle. It is a flame, and it must be fed. And what feeds it is engagement with life in its fullness. To embrace the ultimate truth, you must also embrace its shadow. Nothing in life is guaranteed to be meaningful unless you make it so. This means that love, friendship, work, art, these are not inherently meaningful by default. They become meaningful when you bring your whole being to them, when you risk yourself in them, when you refuse to treat them as mere background scenery in your own life. The modern temptation is to approach life as a spectator, sampling experiences as if browsing through a gallery. But the truth demands that you step onto the canvas, get paint on your hands, and be willing to ruin the picture 100 times to make something real. The ultimate realization also carries an ethical weight. If you are the creator of your meaning, then you must take full responsibility for the shape of your life, not just for your own sake, but for the world you touch. Nietzsche's idea of the Übermensch is not about dominance over others. It is about mastery over yourself, so profound that your very way of being becomes a gift, an example, an inspiration for others to live fully. By creating meaning for yourself, you give permission, without words, for others to do the same. And in that way, the act of self-creation ripples outward, slowly shifting the culture away from passivity and toward vitality. But Nietzsche is not naive. He knows that this path is not for everyone. Many will hear this truth and recoil, preferring the comfort of borrowed meanings. Many will choose sedation over creation, the safety of the last man over the risk of becoming more. That is their choice. But if you feel the weight of this truth pressing against your chest, if you sense that something inside you is straining against the walls of the life you have now, then you have already begun. The question is whether you will continue. Because this is the other side of the ultimate truth. There is no finish line. There will be days when you wake up with clarity and strength, and days when the void yawns wide and you are tempted to slip back into autopilot. The work is to return to creation again and again, even when it's hard, even when it feels impossible. Nietzsche's eternal recurrence is not just a thought experiment about fate. It is a challenge to live in such a way that you would willingly choose your life over and over. To live so that even its hardships are worth repeating, because they are bound up with the joy of a life you have authored with your own hands. And here at the end comes the most liberating part. There is no right meaning, only the meaning you are willing to stand for with your entire existence. Whether you find it in raising a child, building a company, writing a book, exploring the world, or simply tending a small garden with devotion, it is yours, and no one can give it or take it from you. The ultimate truth strips away the illusions of external validation and leaves you standing in the open with nothing but your own will and vision. It is a naked place, but it is also the most alive you will ever feel. And when you finally understand this, not as an abstract idea, but as a lived reality, you see that the meaningless life was never your enemy. It was your invitation. The void was not a threat, but a blank page. And now the pen is in your hand. What will you write? What will you create so fully that if you were asked to live it again and again, you would say without hesitation, yes, once more? That is the cure, and it has been waiting for you all along.